Payday 3's anticipated Skills 2.0 overhaul is here, and for the most part, it's a fantastic revamp of the old system to the point that you wouldn't be discredited for saying it feels like an entirely different game, for better or worse. It's not quite like Payday 2, but it's also nowhere near as micromanagement heavy as the old Edge Grit Rush system was. If you want the achievement for getting all three of those buffs, though, well, have a donut. In all seriousness, Skills 2.0 is a great revitalization that Payday 3 sorely needed, as imperfect as it is. This is pretty clear by just how much my friends and I are enjoying the game now compared to when the old system was in place, and by that I mean they actually want to play it now. But today, I want to talk about what can be done to improve the system, besides what I've talked about last time before the system was even out. For this video, I want to go over 3 key areas that I think Skills 2.0 could use some improvement in that are a bit important long-term, as well as some other minor gripes I have with it afterwards. To understand what those are, though, I'm going to have to go over what skills from the old system were removed that I think could easily find a second life in this system. For those of you that weren't aware of what the old system was, or for those of you that just need a refresher, a vast majority of the old skills from the original, what I'm going to dub the Mio system, are minor abilities that revolved around 3 buffs: Edge for 10% damage, Grit for 10% defense, and Rush for 10% speed. Each skill only costed 1 skill point, no matter how powerful it might have been, while acing, which is effectively investing in the skill twice, into the base skill for a line would also cost only 1 skill point, with the right side of the line having a skill you could essentially put anywhere without any initial investment. There was also this whole researching mechanic where you needed to play without some skills for long enough to unlock them. Nobody liked that part. Most of the builds in this system, however, were essentially asking how do you most effectively get those 3 buffs, and going about that in marginally different ways, like some people going for a hipfire setup for the edge buff, or, like I did, using staggers for that. The system wasn't terrible per se, but it certainly felt like a first draft rather than a refined system of ways to make yourself feel powerful in specific ways, like this rework does. Before I go any further into this video though, I just want to make it fully clear that I like Skills 2.0, and I think it's better than the old system where the defining feature of having access to any skill you wanted with little investment was the biggest double-edged sword you could ever imagine. I mean, the best signifier that this skill system is far superior to what we had before is just the raw excitement I've heard from my friends that saw the kinds of things they can do with this system without me needing to sit there and parse it through for them. Nothing's perfect though, so for what I want to talk about, I'll start with going over some of the skills that unfortunately didn't make the cut in transition to this reworked system. I'm primarily going to focus on ones that could very easily be implemented in the new skill system without much friction. For the sake of clarity, I'll also be splitting these older skills into 3 sections, one for synergizing with armor, another for mask up stealth, and a third for tool usage, because those are what I think the 3 biggest weak points are with this new system, but could also be easily improved with some relatively minor tweaks. Starting with discussing armor, I'm going to bring up a skill that pretty much anyone running adaptive plates used called Plate Up, which basically instantly recharges your current armor plate for picking up ammo, leading to a very aggressive playstyle where you were running around killing enemies before they could break your armor plate. I think this skill could easily be able to return in this new system, likely as either a tier 3 or tier 4 skill in the Juggernaut tree. If you're hearing that and thinking, but there's no room for it there, you'd be right. But who says that Starbeast has to have the same amount of skills on his tree? Obviously keeping tier 1 skills alone so you can branch out from there is fine, but you could fit another skill in the tier 3 slide, and it'd be even easier to fit another skill in with tier 4 since there's only 1 skill there already anyway. All this is that they just don't decide to put it back in its own tree anyway. Another skill, or more specifically the old 4-plate armor passive of healing your armor's trauma damage, I think could also be a rather expensive skill just by how powerful it could be with the armor-based playstyle, maybe even making the ace effectiveness being the instant plate regen on kill, effectively being the new plate up. Killing 2 birds with 1 stone though. Before I actually played with the new skill system and seeing how easily armor can be restored, especially with armored up 2 ace, I was also going to say Clean Slate should make a return, but now I kind of feel like it's fine to leave it unless Starbreeze feels like there's enough skill ideas to make a whole new tree in the future. But primarily what I want to address with this is an adaptive armor playstyle coming back, because it was one of my favorites of the old skill system. Without it, adaptive is likely going to become more niche than the FIC-22 was before the launch of Skills 2.0. Next are a couple of skills from the old Assassin skill line, particularly Skimming the Ground, which was just a speed buff for having express weapon equipped. It doesn't seem too special on the surface, but having a refreshable speed buff in stealth was actually really fun when you were playing around that, and I feel like it could be even better if that speed buff felt more significant, which can very easily be accomplished with this new system, I feel. Especially considering the fact that Adrenaline is being used to replace Rush when you haven't masked up now. It works, but once you do mask up, there's pretty much no Rush equivalent anymore, and for as lackluster as the original skill system was, juggling Rush and Stealth was very fun to do as a risk-reward gambit, at least once you were masked up. So potentially some kind of skills for keeping tabs on guards, like marking them like the old Assassin Ace affected with Rush or other things like that could be neat to have, just something for when you're masked up, like being detect slow if your weapon is silence, and kind of just spitballing with, to be entirely honest. Though one of the big stealth boons that was lost with Skills 2.0 has to do with the little ECM jammers, specifically their ability to disable cameras that they're near. Now, while I do agree that having 4 separate loopable cameras is pretty powerful in its own right, there's one little modifier that completely negates that called Cerberus Core, which, if you didn't know, resets the loop on a camera after 5 seconds, making the runtimes not all that useful anymore. There was also the other utility of having an ECM jammer in stealth, that being speed hack skill, which, while niche, certainly helped in a pinch in stealth. Point is, ECM jammers got nerfed in stealth gameplay and there's nothing really to compensate for it. Except for motion sensor permanently marking guards, that's extremely useful and there's a roaming lead guard, but that's not a thing Skills 2.0 introduced. Point being, ECMs, as well as infrasonic mines, need some skills to make them useful in stealth and loud gameplay respectively. Fortunately, at least for the mines, I have a bit of a solution since every throwable has a secondary effect now in Skills 2.0. Let's use Spotlight as an example. This skill marks any enemy affected by your flashbangs. Simple. Now, what if by equipping this skill, your infrasonic mines also had the same effect? Any enemy hit by your infrasonic mine now would get marked, or whatever effect of the throwable skill you have in your current build is, as well as just being stunned by the mine itself. That'd be good multi-purpose utility, which is one of the things the skill system lacks, but it's not exactly a bad thing in every single aspect. You have to have specialties in some cases. One aspect where I do think this falls a bit flat, though, is with weapons. Most of the skills are great and emphasize the kind of role each of these weapons is supposed to be, like assault rifles being the armor ignores, SMGs completely destroying armor, and shotguns being single target WMDs. But the problem lies with how the skills work overall, making it so that if you want to specialize built in one aspect, you can only really spec into a single gun rather than both your primary and sidearm. That's assuming you're not running the Just Gun and another shotgun, which is pretty much the only exception since both would be classified as shotguns. So my proposition for this is rather simple. Make one of each of the tier 2 and tier 3 skills universal for every gun, and for balancing purposes, make the effectiveness with the unintended gun half, or change it in another way. Using Multitasker Ace in this example, this skill has a cooldown of 8 seconds for quick meleeing an enemy to reload. Let's say you use this skill with the LMG. Instead of it having an 8-second cooldown, the cooldown would be 1 second per bullet the gun could hold, meaning the LMG would have a 100-second cooldown instead. Obviously, this is a bit of an extreme example, but my point still stands that if it's not the weapon the skill is intended for, the buff wouldn't be quite as strong, but would still be easily noticeable when you use it and incentivize side climbing for even more build variety. Another weapon-related thing that I want to talk about really quickly is the head game skill. This is a very powerful skill, especially considering it scales, at this point, indefinitely, where it only ends when you switch weapons. Whereas the SMG equivalent of this, where reloading an empty magazine gives you a damage buff that increases every time you reload an empty magazine, SMGenius is tier 4. Head games is the tier 1 skill for sniper rifles, while Ricochet is the tier 4, which is very powerful in its own right, and I'm not going to deny that, but it is not powerful enough to justify it being on tier 4. Compared to how powerful head games can become. I really think the simplest way to handle this is just switch the positions, make head games the tier 4 skill, while Ricochet is the tier 1 skill, with the costs being switched as well. That would be the simplest way to balance it, while also making it so that it's enough of an investment that the reward that you can get is powerful enough to justify the investment. Because, for all its faults, head games has made me love the FIC-22. And I hated that weapon. I considered it the worst weapon since it released originally. It was actually just that bad. But now it's one of my preferred weapons, which is just kind of crazy how much of a turnaround that weapon has had purely because of this skill. This is the only part that I didn't script. Speaking of side climbing, something that bugs me a bit with Skills 2.0 overall is just how spread out all the stealth related skills are. For example, the skills to instantly lockpick locks is in the dodge tree for whatever reason. Runtime skills are in another tree with the radio hacking skill, and don't even get me started on how Imposter makes you think it's about adrenaline, but when you look at 4 of the 6 skills, they're all stealth focused. Okay, to be clear, I don't mind having some of the stealth skills separate, but fusing loud and stealth in the same tree isn't a good idea. I've said this in my last video, and I'm going to say it again now. It's better to have one that's more focused on one side that has a skill that could be used in both, like what I mentioned earlier, a skill for marking enemies gives you a speed buff. That has uses in both gameplay styles. If Starbreeze were to add a new skill tree in the system, there needs to be a better focus on stealth, with one of the branches in that new skill tree being effectively entirely stealth focused, like reorganizing the Imposter tree, so that loud players have a reason to invest in more than the tier 1 and tier 4 skills. To repeat myself from the beginning, since I ended this with some pretty harsh criticism, I think Skills 2.0 is great and brings some much needed life to the game, but it's not without its faults and potential improvements in the future, as we can already see from the fact that the foreseen January patch will be changing this already. These are just my suggestions on how this could be changed and improved, as well as getting some older skills to return. Skills 2.0 is great, and if you're considering getting Payday 3 at all, especially if it's in one of the inevitable Steam sales, this is the perfect incentive to give it a shot. In terms of future videos on Payday 3, though, I'm planning to make a video somewhat similar to this one, but in regards to a couple of the heists in the game, and specific things to improve them, since those heists need some touching up, and I feel like there's some solutions that could be implemented without much issue, while also putting out some ideas that could be good for the long term as well. But with that said, I appreciate you watching this and hope you take care.